Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and Infogalactic News. You'll have to forgive me, I'm doing a little caffeine here while we're talking. It's kind of a cool mug, actually. It heats up, or as it heats up, the Pac-Man fills in. So I was a little disappointed it doesn't actually move around depending on how hot it is, but it's kind of a fun mug for a gamer. Anyhow, before we get started, obviously we'll note that America has enthusiastically endorsed the punching of journos. Are Jews allowed in here? Sure, why not? We're going to talk about the neo-paganism and so forth. I think popular would be a pretty serious exaggeration, but it's definitely worth discussing. So first, one thing that I wanted to draw your attention to that I found particularly amusing was the way that this Montana election was supposed to be a referendum on Trump, right up until the Republican candidate allegedly body slammed a reporter and still ended up winning the election by nearly 7 points. Now suddenly, this is not a referendum on Trump. This means nothing. As always, the SJWs and the media are desperate to maintain their narrative at any cost. So, you may notice that there's a book missing behind me. Can anyone spot which one it is? So, if you notice these green books right here, they're some of my prized possessions. My wife actually got them for me as an anniversary present, and they're fabulous. They're the original Cambridge Medieval History series. It's an 8-volume series. Highly recommend it. I think there's a couple now. It's all public domain, and so I think there's a couple different Kindle versions that you can get very inexpensively. I like to have the real thing myself. I've read most of them. I mean, I haven't read, obviously I haven't read, the 1911 Britannica from page to page, nor have I read the entire Cambridge Ancient History, but I've read most of the other stuff. So, now the reason that I picked this out, you can see actually that I haven't finished reading this one either. But Volume 1 is it's entitled The Christian Empire. Okay? And so the section that is particularly interesting, is particularly relevant to the topic that we're discussing here, is the section entitled Chapter 4, The Triumph of Christianity. It was written by one Reverend T.M. Lindsay, and he talks about the growing strength of Christianity in the 3rd century, the legislation against paganism, the Emperor Julian the Apostate and paganism, Julian's religion policy, Julian's endeavors to reform paganism, and Julian's failure, the decay of paganism in the East and survivals of it, and then paganism in the West and its influence on literature and Christianity. Now what you have to understand about this is that this whole series, the green ones, the medieval history, they were edited by one J.B. Bury. Bury is one of the great historians, in my opinion, of mankind. But He was not particularly keen on Christianity or Christians. I was actually a little disappointed when I read his book, A History of the Freedom of Thought, because it became very clear that he was a Enlightenment rationalist and was very interested and fascinated by the Enlightenment, and really felt that it was an instrument of freedom, whereas the church was a instrument of benightedness and repression. Now this is not true, just so you understand. The whole idea of enlightenment actually is based on, believe it or not, a basic Christian concept. The original concept of enlightenment was actually the idea of Jesus Christ being the light of the world, coming up and illuminating the pagan darkness, that had preceded him. Now the interesting thing is that this all got completely flipped around for reasons that had nothing to do with religion. It was actually based on the reaction of a Italian poet to the decline of Rome and the rise of Germany, which was kind of ironic. So put on some headphones and turn up your volume. We go through this every single time. Just don't talk about the volume. If you can't hear, turn it off or turn it up. Your choice. So that actually completely reversed the whole concept of Christianity being the Enlightenment, and then suddenly Christianity was the darkness, and then later, 2 centuries later, the French philosophers jumped on that concept, and that's why we talk about the Enlightenment right now. So it's the idea that reason is enlightenment versus Jesus Christ. And so this is just a little history for you, nothing too complicated. But the important thing to understand here is that Bury is not somebody who was a big fan of Christianity. But he understood the influence and the impact that it had. And so, well, that's what's funny. You have to understand, there was never any war between reason and faith. It's never existed. I defy anyone who claims to be a rationalist to read Aristotle, to read Augustine, to read Aquinas, and not realize that these are men with a much stronger grasp of reason than you, or than any of the scientists or devotees of reason that you believe to be highly rational. I guarantee you, if you don't believe me, if you happen to be an acolyte of Dawkins or Harris or Michel Onfray or Daniel Dennett, to name a few more serious philosophers, go ahead and read my book, The Irrational Atheist. It's not based on religion. It's not based on the Bible. It's not based on my personal faith. It is just based on facts and reason, nothing else. And it tears all of them apart because they're not actually they are devotees of reason. They're just not very good at it. And so, so the point is, Bury is not he's not biased towards Christianity. If anything, he was biased against it. And yet, no, Sam Harris is not a serious philosopher. We know that. But I'll give Dennett some credit, and Onfray is taken very seriously. Yes, you can be an atheist and a cultural Christian. Dawkins is correct about that. But what I want to talk about is what this book discusses in reasonably considerable detail. And we're talking about probably over 100 pages dedicated to it. And what it's talking about is the intellectual and cultural battle between paganism and early Christianity. Not early Christianity, but the third century, 4th century, 5th century. This is when that was all taking place. And the interesting thing to me is that both the Christians at the time, as well as these later writers, as well as these Christian writers and these culturally Christian writers, praise these pagans. They praise them highly. They talk about how the paganism of this era, the paganism that Julian was attempting to build up as a competitor to Christianity, was noble, it was virtuous, it was eucivic, highly positive. It was not at all what we tend to think of as paganism. It wasn't about running around naked. It wasn't about temple priestesses. It wasn't about any of this stuff. Had nothing to do with Hypatia, had nothing to do with Wicca, had nothing to do with sacrificing humans and so forth. Okay, there's no druids and wicker baskets here. No blood eagles. This was, in the opinion of Christians at the time, and in the opinion of the early 20th century historians, a highly noble, highly virtuous, highly admirable form of paganism. And yet, it still lost out. It still lost out to Christianity. And the authors go into why. And the main reason that paganism failed then, and the main reason that paganism will fail as an alternative to Christianity today, is that it does not offer the hope, and it does not offer the let's call it the future time sense that Christianity does. It does offer its own form of salvation. You have to understand that salvation is not considered necessary in most pagan religions because there is no sense of the world being fallen. And to me, that's something that they don't get into, but to me that's something else that is very, very important. I came to my faith in Christianity through a sense of evil. This is something that Stefan Molyneux and Mike Cernovich and I talked about after the whole spirit cooking thing. I do not believe that the world is intrinsically good. I do not believe that evil is nothing but a social construct. I believe that it is a material presence, and I believe that it is something that we can feel inside us. I believe it is something that we can resist, and I believe it is something that we can submit to. And this is not the result of sky daddies and magic texts and so forth. This is a result of observation and sensation. I'm a non-denominational Christian. I was raised in the Baptist church. I would say I was an agnostic, philosophical hedonist until about 26. Then after that, I joined, while I was living in the States, my wife and I actually formally joined a Southern Baptist church. But for me, the convincing and clinching argument, and it's something that you can read on my blog in a discussion with an atheist, is based on, everything is based on an understanding that the world is fallen and evil exists. Guys, on the questions, try not to get distracted with these tangential things, okay? So the point is that, let's get to the alt-right and the current situation now. So what we're seeing is that Europe, America, and the West are in decline, invaded, and failing. We are currently undergoing a civilizational crisis. And the civilizational crisis is based on the growing post-Christianity of the former Christendom. The West is Christendom. There is a reason why those poor murdered victims at the Ariana Grande concert were described as crusaders by ISIS. How many of those people that died or were wounded were actually Christians? Statistically speaking, in England, probably 3 or 4 of them. But they are still viewed as part of the West, and so therefore they are Christendom, and therefore they are Christians, crusaders, etc., etc. How much at fault are the Christian churches for becoming cucked? 100%. Absolutely 100%. They did not follow the Bible, they did not obey the Bible, and so they're reaping the consequences thereof. So what we're talking about with paganism and the appeal of paganism to people in the alt-right is primarily because they are growing up in a post-Christian, atheistic society, and they are looking for religion, they are looking for meaning, but they have been conditioned against Christianity, they have been inoculated against Christianity, they have been taught falsely about Christianity, and when they look around them, they see this false Churchianity that is globalist and that is discivilizational, that is anti-West. But again, if it's anti-West, it's anti-Christian. Okay? And so what I'm telling you, those of you who are drawn to the pagan aspects, is that you can still be on you can still be part of the alt-right. You can still be on the side of the West, but you're not going to find the answers that you're seeking there. It's not going to work for you. What you're looking for, or what you are using and turning to, is a stopgap measure, and it is a substitute measure that is not going to suffice. Okay? To a certain extent, it is LARPing. People are trying to, and I understand why they do this. I mean, if you accept the atheistic notion that religion is simply an important social construct, then there's no reason not to try to construct your own better social construct. Okay? Now, I am happy to say that modern day paganism is probably a better answer than Churchianity. Churchianity is a perversion. It is an evil perversion. It is exactly what the what Paul warned about. It's the wolves in sheep's clothing. And so, it's, I don't fault any of you who can't find the belief. I would rather hang with Druids rather than, Churchians. I can't bear them. To me, when I hear them talk, it makes me think about Jesus going into the temple with the bullwhips and kicking out the moneylenders. And how do you know how do you distinguish between the two? I mean, an example of the Churchian is the Pope. Look at the traditional Catholic teachings that he's turned against. Anytime, if you read Cuckservative, you can see the example. They basically worship at the church of the Good Samaritan, and then they misapply it. And here's where you can always identify the Churchian. The Churchian will always overestimate the importance of a single verse somewhere that is clearly misapplied. So, for example, they love to talk about the neither Jew nor Greek in Christ. Of course, it cannot possibly mean what they claim it means, because it also says neither male nor female. Now, they don't claim that there are no differences between male and female on that basis. Some of them, I suppose, might get to that point, but what you have to understand is that the denominations and all that sort of thing are all essentially poisoned. The Southern Baptists are better than most, but their national leadership is entirely cucked. Russell Moore actually nearly got fired and should have been fired. Here's the biggest single thing. If the world approves of the denomination, if the world approves of the church, then there is a very good chance that it is the wrong type of church. Western Christianity is largely SJW converged. And you know that because they preach the gospel of social justice. They do not preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. From what I understand, the Eastern Orthodox are actually in much better shape than most. And I don't think it's an example. Where are we seeing the revival? We're seeing the revival in Russia. We're seeing the revival in Eastern Europe. Why? For two reasons. They understand the difference. First of all, there's actually three reasons. Number one, communism already weeded out all of the weak Christians. If you weren't serious about your faith, then you were going to turn away from it. And you were rewarded for doing so. You were persecuted if you didn't. That means that the people in Eastern Europe are stronger Christians than those in the West. Secondly, the Orthodox churches are they're nationalistic. They've never been through a Vatican II style convergence, as far as I'm aware. And so they have a more pure and more correct form of the Christian faith than the Catholics, than the Protestants, etc. And then the third reason is that they understand the threat from Islam on a much deeper level than the West does, because they were on the front lines of the struggle with Islam. Russia has fought, 7 wars with Turkey, with the Ottomans and with Turkey. The Serbians are dealing with the Bosnians and so forth. So there's 3 reasons why the Eastern Europeans, the Russians, and the Eastern Orthodox are considerably less cucked than most Western Christians. Now, again, we're not talking about how to fix the Christian church here. What I'm talking to is the alt-right. I'm talking to the pagans on the alt-right, and what I want you to understand is that the historical model means that you're not going to be successful. Okay? You're going to need, at the very least, to support enthusiastically true Christianity and cultural Christianity, because that is the only way you can defend Christendom. Christendom is the West is Christendom. Okay? The European nations that you're talking about, people are talking about, the historic religions of Scandinavia or Germany or whatever. You need to remember that they're not going to suffice. Okay? The European nations are part of, they are one of the pillars. But here's the point. You can no sooner save the West without Christianity than you can save the West without the European nations. Does that help put it in perspective? It is an integral aspect of the West. If you don't have Christianity, what we are seeing already in these only partially post-Christian cultures is we're seeing that you cannot have the West. And so now there's a question: can you be a pagan and still fight for Christianity? I think so. That's one of the key messages of the New Testament is seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. Okay? How do we bring Christianity to these post-Christian countries? I think the most important thing is to make sure that people distinguish between actual Christianity and, Cuckianity or Churchianity or, whatever it is. Okay? If they are ordaining women, if they are marrying men, if they are, if women are speaking from the pulpit, they have rejected the Bible. And that means they are not part of the true church. They are not part of the crusade. If they're working with refugee resettlement, they are not true Christians. Okay? Yeah, I would certainly consider Stefan Molyneux. I would certainly consider Mike Cernovich to be men who stand with the West. They're not believers. Stefan is an atheist. I think the same does apply to people like Milo. And so but what I want you to understand is that churches that are openly support. Any church that you have to distinguish between somebody like Milo, who believes what he is doing is wrong, and these churches that claim that what they're doing is right. Milo is a Catholic. I know Milo. You know? Milo knows and believes that he is a sinner. So do I. I mean, I know and believe that I'm a sinner. I'm not talking about Milo, although he is too. You know, we're all in this together. We're all fallen. We may have. I don't know. I mean, Rush, I think, is kind of like, you know, he's raised in Islam, but he's essentially agnostic. And he's turned to philosophy to find meaning. So, you know, he's a very interesting character. I like Rush. But again, that's the thing. He's a seeker, as is Stefan. So, anyhow, the yeah, Rush would. I mean, of all the people that might become a monk, Rush would surprise me least. Oh, Rush was raised Eastern Orthodox. Okay, I thought he was raised Islamic. I have no idea. We've never actually talked about that. But yeah, so anyhow, that's all I wanted to talk about tonight. Is I wanted to talk about how both the Christian and the non-Christian alt-right need to come together and support the West. You know, and supporting the West means that some of the Christians are going to have to understand that means supporting the European nations and supporting nationalism. They're going to have to reject the internationalism that they were falsely taught. In the same way, the pagans are going to have to understand that without Christianity, you don't have the West. So they're going to have to support Christianity, Christian revival, and so forth. It doesn't mean that they're going to necessarily be a direct part of it themselves. Some of them will, some of them won't. But you can still support Christian culture. You can still support Christians. You can still support those things, whether you believe it or not. Because the key thing is, and this is what I would encourage all of you who are not Christians, and those of you who are Christians to consider. Do you believe that evil exists? If you believe that evil exists, you are already halfway there to accepting the fundamental and intrinsic and necessary foundation of Christianity. Because if evil does not exist, we have no need of salvation. We have no need of the cross. We have no need of repentance. You know, when atheists talk about the problem of evil, this is the single dumbest philosophical argument that has ever been made in the history of man. There is no problem of evil for Christianity. All of Christianity fundamentally depends upon the postulate that evil exists. So, anyhow, I guess this sounds a bit like a sermon, but it's not intended that way. I just want you to understand that there's three components to the West: the European nations, Christianity in its true, proper, and biblical form, and the Greco-Roman philosophical legacy. So, anyhow, have a good evening. Thanks for tuning in. and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.